Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Greco. I'm the events manager at Life University, part of PSS, and we thank you for tuning in today. Today, we're very lucky to have Dr. Ken Weinberg, who's coming back to give us another presentation on cannabis. He's a three-time board-certified emergency medicine and medical marijuana physician. After finishing a residency in internal medicine, Dr. Weinberg created a fellowship in Psychoneuroimmunology at the Manhattan VA, then trained in emergency medicine at Bellevue and NYU Langone. He's a cannabis advocate and an emerging thought leader who has lectured on the benefits of cannabis throughout the state, met with elected officials to promote its use, and been featured in various publications and on TV. When New York State's Compassionate Care Act was passed in January of 2016, Dr. Weinberg founded Cannabis Doctors of New York. The practice, which is based in New York City and upstate, certifies patients, educates the public, and advocates for the many benefits of medical marijuana. The advocacy, education, as well as cannabis research are also carried out in his role as a member of the Medicinal Cannabis Work Group at Northwell Health. Please put any questions you have during the presentation in the Q&A for Dr. Weinberg to answer. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Weinberg.
Thanks, Matthew. Right, so I'll just give a brief background about Cannabis Doctors and what we do. I started it in 2016, and we've seen about probably 1,500 patients in that time with a variety of medical conditions. And most recently, we're seeing a lot of patients with dementia. So I'm really happy to talk about that today. And the group comprises me, Richard Carlton, who is a integrative psychiatrist, who's great to have as part of the group because any of the more complicated psychiatric issues I will generally give to him, who are being treated with cannabis. And then Sarah Holwile, who joined us recently, and I will say, I should change what we say because we now have a Long Island practice as well, thanks to her. She's been great to have on board because she brings her own perspective on things, and she had been a labor and delivery nurse for many years, and for the last 8 years, she has been in the cannabis space and is available for answering questions and consults. So she's on board as well. And then I wanted to thank Lauren, who's going to do our slideshow, who is our patient advocate and major domo, if I may. Anyway, so that's a little bit about the group. So I always want to start, I think it's important, and if some of the people here have heard my prior talk, I apologize, but I think it's important to start out talking about the history of cannabis, because I believe, and I'll talk about this a little more, that we've really evolved with this plant. You can show the next slide, Lauren. And you know, there's a lot of stuff in here, but I think it's important to know that for thousands, many thousands of years, there have been all kinds of references across civilizations about medical cannabis. Oh no, I'm blocking on his name. So I'm sure that everybody knows, or most people know, Carl Sagan. He was a major proponent of cannabis, and he believes that because the plant had so many benefits, so many qualities, so many things to take advantage of, and we're talking about cannabis and hemp, which are basically brother and sister. The only real distinction is that the hemp plant has less than 0.3% THC. And but in any case, both of them offered so many benefits that it forced us to go from being hunter-gatherers to an agrarian society. You had to be able to be in one place. You had to plant the seeds, you had to be able to cultivate the plant, you had to be able to harvest it, and then take advantage of all of the different properties that it had to, so the point is that true? I don't know, but I think it's an interesting proposition that he makes. Okay, we can move on. The other thing that I think is really important to know is that up until 1937, cannabis was part of many, many medicines that were used in this country. And here are some, old bottles, but all of them were products that were used through the medical community that included cannabis in them. And we can go on to the next. Unfortunately, there were a lot of political things that happened in the 30s. And I don't know if anyone has ever seen the movie Reefer Madness. It's, I think, one of the most amazing and long-lasting propaganda films ever made. People still refer to this. They talk about the killer weed. And the funny thing is that in the 5,000 years or so that we know about, nobody's ever died from cannabis. This is also when they started referring to it as marijuana instead of cannabis, and because it was a reference to people of color, and it allowed them to demonize it. So the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, making cannabis illegal. And then in 1970, Richard Nixon was outraged at all of people of my generation smoking roofer, as he called it. They started the Controlled Substance Act. They passed that, and the DEA went into effect, and they made cannabis a Schedule I narcotic, which means basically it has no medical benefits and high addiction potential. And other Schedule I substances are heroin, LSD, and the problem with that is that it's caused such difficulty in terms of doing research. And in addition to all of the negative images that it is maintained over all the years, I mean, just to give you an example, as an emergency physician, I have a Schedule II through V narcotics license. So I could prescribe amphetamine for you. I can prescribe opiates for you. I can prescribe cocaine for you. I can't prescribe cannabis for you. And this is probably a good place to say this. What the states have done, in New York State in particular, their workaround is that when I see a patient and certify them, I'm writing a certification, and then they go to one of the medical dispensaries, and the pharmacist actually prescribes medical cannabis for them. So that's the workaround. Okay, we can go on to the next one. So this is a typical cannabis plant. I'm sure many of you have seen it growing. And again, if you were to look at this, you couldn't tell the difference between this and hemp. They're almost identical. But in just looking at the different parts of the plant, I go back to, I read something, Pliny the Elder in 100 AD referenced the roots being used for joint inflammation. There's a burgeoning industry now using the stems for building materials. Hemp rope has been around for hundreds of years. When we look at the leaves for juicing, for paper, our own Declaration of Independence was written on hemp parchment. The various things that are used by that the seeds can provide, and then the flowers, which is really where most people's interest lies. And in addition to the medicinal qualities, which I'll be talking about a lot, there are spiritual parts of it. I had read early on that when the first temple was built in Jerusalem, the priests were told to be anointed with an oil that contained cannabosum. Is that cannabis? We'll never know. I have a rabbi colleague who believes that the burning bush was cannabis. And I also think that it's important to, because there, again, all the myths and the ways this has been derogated, the pleasure part of cannabis, it's okay to use alcohol and get high from alcohol, but there's just been this negative connotation of using cannabis for pleasure. And I think that blends into what a lot of our patients see when they're using it. So many of the chronic pain patients, for example, they feel better when they use cannabis. In addition to the actual medical properties it has, people feel better about, they have a different feeling about, they're distracted. I talk to patients all the time who say, yeah, you know, my neuropathy, I don't know absolutely if it's better, but I know I don't think about it. I don't care about it. I think that's okay. I think that helps. Anything that really can help patients with their chronic issues, cannabis can be very helpful for. So that's sort of my wrap on the plant. But I think it's important to know that the plant itself really has hundreds of different compounds in it. There are many different cannabinoids. I'll show the structures of those. The ones that everybody thinks about, the most common ones are THC and CBD, but there are many others that all have a lot of benefits. I'll mention the terpenes because they're one of the elements of it. And people may not know what terpenes are, but if you walk through a pine forest, pinene is the smell that you get. If you cut up a lemon, limonene is the terpene from a lemon. And those things are not just important for the smell, but they really are very important in the different strains have different amounts of cannabinoids, and very importantly, the terpenes. And it's interesting because smell is one of the things that I'll mention that people with dementia lose early on. And some people are doing work with terpenes to try to stimulate the cognitive issues that people have. So terpenes are very important. Okay, let's move on to the next. So again, I don't know if there are any chemists in the room, but here are the typical cannabinoid structures, CBD and THC. They all have 3 rings, and then the differences between one or another are like, you'll see there's CH3, H3C in one place, and oxygen in another, but those minor changes are what really give the different properties that each of the cannabinoids have. And of interest to me is the fact that if you look at this, as you see at the end of CBD and THC, there are those CH3. There's a long, it's like a tail. If you were to look at the cannabinoids we make in our own endocannabinoid system, the system of neurotransmitters in our brain, which is why cannabis works when we take it, it looks very similar to this. And I've always been struck by the fact, and this is why I said before, I think we've evolved with the plant. And I think that's the reason why the structures, the cannabinoids, the inside cannabinoids we make are so similar to the phyto or plant cannabinoids that I'm showing here. Okay, we can go on to the next. And again, this is the endocannabinoid system. I just talk about this a little bit. What is we talk about a lot is the fact that probably 10% of medical schools, and Sarah and I have talked about this, we don't even know if about nursing schools teach about the endocannabinoid system, and it is so important. And it's disturbing that so many of our colleagues in the medical nursing profession don't even know that it exists or how important it is. But it is so, as I mentioned, it controls so many different systems. And it's why we see it doing the things that it does. I know of no other substance that can help with pain and neurologic problems, GI, dermatologic problems, urologic problems, It's because it is the master system. And I'll just mention one other thing. When people were trying to see how cannabis worked, and they decided, oh, well, let's see if we have an endocannabinoid system in the brain. This was in the 90s. They did a PET scan, and the brain lit up so much. There were so many areas of the brain that showed that they had endocannabinoid receptors that people thought it was a false positive. They couldn't believe there were so many areas of the brain where there were endocannabinoid receptors, but as we've learned, in fact, there are. Okay. So, and I'm sure people know this, these numbers, and really that most of the people we see who have dementia, the majority of them have Alzheimer's, but, and you can show the next slide, there are so many other causes of dementia that we all see as practitioners, and I'm sure you guys see as well. We can move on to the next one. And I mention this because I think, especially with Alzheimer's, if people know that they may have a genetic predisposition, that it's been shown that 20 to 30 years before people actually exhibit outward manifestations of Alzheimer's, there are already these neurofibrillary tangles, all of the things that cause Alzheimer's are already evident in the brain. And so people really should be doing all they can to try to minimize their risk of it. And I will make a case that I think using cannabis could be one of those things that could be done early on. Okay, we can go on. So again, I'm sure most of the people here are aware of these neuropsychiatric symptoms that are that we see, and that a lot of the tests that are done or the studies that we look at these symptoms to see what is happening and any interventions, how they affect these symptoms. And again, interestingly, loss of smell is one that I'm kind of intrigued by. Okay, we can move on. So when current treatment options for Alzheimer's are three, two of them are here. The first one obviously is the management of the neuropsych symptoms. And a lot of times things are used like Seroquel, like Haldol. And I, having been an emergency physician, and I imagine Sarah might have something to say about this as well, I hate those drugs. In addition to just them knocking down people, they are less interactive because of these drugs. They also have black box warnings. People get sick, some people die from them. So treating antipsychotic symptoms with Seroquel and things like Haldol, I'm not in favor of. I think some of the SSRIs, because depression is involved clearly with Alzheimer's and the other dimensions, I think that using antidepressants certainly can be helpful. And then there are the symptomatic treatments. So acetylcholinesterase, the cholinergic acetylcholine is a major neurotransmitter that's involved with cognitive issues. And acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. That's how Aricept works. So the thought is that if you can maintain levels of acetylcholine, you can help with cognition. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. We can go on to the next one. And then there are the actual disease-modifying treatments. This is the third way of trying to treat Alzheimer's. And something that was just recently approved are monoclonal antibody injections. It's so early that I think the jury's still out on that. But then I will talk about medical cannabis products, which I think can be very helpful as disease modifying. And I'll say why in a moment, but these are some of the various ways, and we can certainly talk about that more, but there are so many ways of taking cannabis, whether they're short acting like vapes or sprays or joints, smoking products, and then longer acting products, which are the ones that you ingest, like lozenges, excuse me, capsules, gummies, powders, topicals as well, which is a whole other thing. So there are many ways of taking cannabis. Okay, we can move on to the next. And I just wanted to mention this. When I came upon this quote, I thought it was really pretty profound. And I'm sure all of us are aware of this when we deal with people we love or that we're treating. As they lose their memory, they really lose who they are. And so anything we can do to alleviate that, or maybe even allow them to regain some memory, is obviously, I think, the goal for all of us practitioners. Okay, we can move on to the next. So again, in terms of Alzheimer's, these are the things that are happening. The plaques, people must probably know that plaques which are invading the space where the neurons ordinarily would be, so neurotransmission is stopped in those areas. Those the fibrils that are talked about. There's also a lot of neuroinflammation that goes on as part of the process. So there's loss of neurons. There's an immune response that happens that's a negative immune response that causes more disruption of the transmission of neural impulses, cytotoxicity, which is basically death of the cells, and then again the decrease in acetylcholine. Okay, we can move on. So it turns out, and I'll focus here again because I think it's so important, THC is the strongest known inhibitor of acetylcholinesterase. So there's good reason to believe that using THC can maintain acetylcholine levels, help with cognition. It also prevents the development of those neurofibrillary tangles. CBD, we know, is a great anti-inflammatory. And another really important thing that CBD does is as an anxiolytic, as something that really alleviates anxiety. And the reason I got very involved in dementia is I've been seeing a number of patients, especially at a place called Inspire, which some of you may know about. It's on the Upper East Side, and they have a very positive feeling about using cannabis. And what I've seen in the patients that I've been seeing there is a lot of certainly their behavioral issues are from anxiety. I mean, a lot of these people have lost frontal lobe function. They don't have those inhibitory pathways, and so they're acting out, they're aggressive. And a lot of that is because of anxiety. And it makes sense that for any of us, as we see that our cognitive abilities are declining, it's a really anxiety provoking situation. And CBD is very helpful for that anxiety. So we're seeing really tremendous help with those behavioral issues. Instead of using Haldol, let's say, these patients are getting high CBD products and the aggression is diminished. They're more interactive. And because I think for any of us, anxiety can really prevent us from accessing information, names, other things, even if we're allegedly cognitively intact. I think the CBD really helps there. And I have patients and their families and nurses talk to me about how some of the patients are remembering things. The son will say, wow, my father remembered things from so many years ago that he had forgotten about. So that's really so promising and great to hear. And the last thing I'll say here is that it seems that actually cannabis may help remold, may help with the plasticity of the brain. It's another way that maybe we can start getting things back. Again, because it's a Schedule I narcotic in this country, it's very difficult to do great research on it. It's very hard to get a Schedule I narcotics license, and it's very frustrating. And you'll see in the studies that I'll talk about in a minute that some of the stuff is being done in other countries because it's much easier for them to do it there. Okay, let's move on. Right, as I said, these are areas that are affected in dementia, and it turns out that cannabis can help. And I'll talk about this in a minute. In one of the studies, the hippocampus can be helped by cannabis. So let's move on to the studies. These two are mouse studies, and I just mentioned them because, they're mice and, how much correlation is there? But this study looked at how it could really, cannabidiol, which is CBD, can really help with memory recognition among these mice. They were helped by it, and these were mice that have been genetically modified to really exhibit many of the same issues that dementia patients have. So it was shown that they had some of their memory deficits were actually alleviated. You can move on to the next one. And this one, they actually had induced ischemia. They had induced problems in the hippocampus, particularly in these mice. And they found that, again, CBD really reduced the neuroinflammation I talked about, that neuroplasticity, and it helped recovery in these mice. Okay, we can move on. I'm a part of a group called the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, and there was just a talk a couple of weeks ago looking at cannabis and dementia. There were 400 plus people from around the world who were involved with this, and they mentioned this study, which was so interesting to me because this is, as you see, from 1997. They were doing work even then on dementia with cannabis. Dronabinol, you may know, is a synthetic THC that a lot of oncologists are still using because it really helps for appetite stimulation and nausea. But here it was also helping with the agitation of patients with Alzheimer's. We can move on. This was a review of many different studies from Canada, and this looked at, there was much decreased agitation in the patient. Patients' sleep disorders were helped with this, and the caregivers were struck by how much cannabis was helped across these different studies. Also they noted help with the aggressiveness of the patients. We can move on. This was a Swiss study that looked at 10 patients. These were studies that were using THC and CBD, and a lot of you may be familiar with the Cohn-Mansfield scale for looking at agitation. They found that it was very helpful for this, and people were actually able to stop taking other meds. Okay, go on. So this was a systemic review. I think this was from this country, if I'm not mistaken. And this really was looking at the fact that that cannabis was helpful and it also was safe for use in the neuropsychiatric symptoms in dementia. And these are all available, so obviously anybody who wants to look at them can give them a look afterwards. Next one. Right, this was a study. A friend of mine is a GI doctor in in Israel sent me this, and it is at this moment, cannabis is legal in Israel. We'll see what Bibi may do about that. But anyway, so this looked at 60 different patients, and they found really positive effects. There's a lot that was being done. They saw rigidity in the patients were diminished, which was obviously helpful, not just for the patients, but for the caregivers. They were able to move them easier. Their agitation went down. I think this one also looked at the Cohen-Mansfield scale and saw improvements there. Okay, go on. So Colorado State University, I've been to two conferences out there in Pueblo. They're doing a lot of work on cannabis and dementia, and they just got funding to do to look into this. And so I intend to be in touch with them to really see what they're doing. They have a very robust program out there. And then the last one, just to bring us up to date. Yeah, this was a study that just came out this year in Greece, which also, showed decreased Cohen-Mansfield scale effects and efficacy, lack of side effects. So all of this, I think, is just really encouraging. And, to me and to our group, I mean, we want to do more studies. We're actually involved with something that I'm hoping is going to take off very soon with Northwell, looking at cannabis and dementia, a longitudinal study, which I'm excited about. I'll just give one quick case report. This is a patient that I've been seeing at Inspire. She's a retired physician. When she got there, she was very agitated. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't eating. She was biting and hitting. And she's been now on cannabis for over a year. She's gained weight. She's more interactive. She's more with it. And the family is so happy about this, as are the nurses, the nursing staff. I mean, it's, just, and she is an example of one of many patients we're seeing who have these positive responses to cannabis. We can move on. So again, these are the things that I've been seeing with these patients. And at this point in my career, it's so exciting and gratifying to be able to help these people who otherwise have just been over-medicated. Their interactions with their caregivers, their families are so diminished, and they really come alive and are so much better. And I'm glad to give this talk because hopefully you guys are seeing patients who we might be able to get involved with and really help them. So let's see what else we have. Yeah, I think that's it. So hopefully we have enough time for, you can show that last pleasant slide, Lauren. Time for Sarah and I to take questions. I hope that this has been informative and provocative, and we're here to talk more about it.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Weinberg. We look like we have a quiet group today. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. In the meantime, I have a couple questions, so I don't mind going first. Dr. Weinberg, is there anyone where it's not indicated to use cannabis for dementia? Any types of symptoms or?
That's a good question. And Sarah could chime in on this. I feel like it's such a, I don't think I could generalize. I think, looking at it on a case-by-case basis, depending on what may have caused the dementia, what the underlying medical issues are, potentially there could be some places, but this, like any other drug, you always want to start low and go slow. So you're really starting at very low doses where it's very unlikely that there will be issues. And if there are, then you stop. But, you know, you can just start at a low dose and gradually go up. And Sarah, what do you think?
I basically want every person that I'm fond of over the age of 60 to start taking this right now. I mean, why wouldn't you? So I agree. I mean, maybe if someone takes too much, to piggyback on what Dr. Weinberg said, you know, the risk of fall might be a problem, but that's really if they're not being guided well and taking too much too quickly. You know, if they take it slowly and increase to the optimal amount for symptom relief, some of these sort of side effects that could be deemed negative, like fall risk, are really not going to be present if it's done well. So, no, I think it would be great for everyone.
Okay, very good. Now, I was talking to Dr. Weinberg briefly yesterday about this subject, but as someone in the elder cohort, familiar with marijuana use at a younger age, I'm wondering, do you run into patients who've previously used it or are currently using it, and does that affect anything in terms of your treatment?
No, Sarah, what do you?
I've experienced both, but I'd say in there are many people who try it for the first time in their 70s and 80s. I've had that experience probably more than the other. And, you know, for whatever reason, it wasn't part of their life, or they didn't experiment with it when they were younger, and they have amazing results. I think I always ask patients what their experience is. And, you know, then if they are using it in some way, I want to know where they're getting it, what the quality is. So yes, I've seen both, but I'm still going to probably approach it the same way. Maybe someone who's not naive and who has used it before, you know, and their body's a little more familiar, maybe I'll start a tiny bit faster, but I'm also going to use something that's a slow acting and a faster acting to help mitigate all of their symptoms. So yes and no.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I'm glad you used the word naive. We use the word, you know, we talk about patients, to your point, of were cannabis naive or not. And certainly the people who are elderly but used it long ago. I mean, what I feel comfortable about reintroducing them is that, again, you can start at very low doses. We know what they're getting. You know, that's what I like about the medical program, that it's really precise and it's consistent. And in New York State, they're also, before they get started, they're seeing after talking to Sarah or I, they're seeing a pharmacist who's very well versed in the products, and as well as any medicines that they may be taking in terms of side effects and things like that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, and also in my experience, people aren't coming to this as a first line of therapy. They've tried other things. They're not happy. They're not getting sleep. So then their agitation, you know, it's just a vicious cycle, and they just need help, and they're open-minded. And if some, you know, amount of this plant that is basically non-toxic is going to help them, they want that help. And it can be an adjunct to what they're already taking. Some people will, you know, it will just help where their current medicines are not helping anymore. Some people like to taper off of those other medicines. So there are many ways, but people, in my experience, are just open-minded and want help.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'll just piggyback on that, because so many of the people that we're seeing are people, especially the elderly, who have been on so many other things, may not have wanted to try cannabis, and then like, all of these things don't work, or they have side effects, or they constipate me, or whatever. And so when they come to us, they generally are very open and willing to give it a try.
And I see in the webinar chat, someone's asking, how can I convince my mother's medical doctor to consider this as part of her treatment for dementia? Have you asked that doctor already, and what was the answer? I mean, have you even approached it with your physician? You could unmute yourself and show
Yeah.
your face.
Yeah, actually, they can't, so.
Oh, they can't. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So maybe we'll wait for a response in the chat, but meanwhile, we do have some other questions that have come in. I can read one from the Q&A.
Sure.
Dr. Weinberg, do you really think this is going to be something that doctors are going to prescribe? I guess she means in a wider sense, and how about those that buy street marijuana?
I think we are doing all we can to try to educate. New York State has not been great about educating. I'm actually working, we just met with Senator Gillibrand's people a couple of weeks ago, and we're trying to push with them about education and about trying to get the law changed. We need medical schools to be teaching this. So I think it's a long process, but I think, yeah, I think things are changing. Sarah, what do you think?
100%. And the question about how can I convince my mother's medical doctor to consider this, and it looks like this doctor has not been asked about it yet. I think more physicians and people across the board are more open-minded about this. It's just, I mean, you pick up the newspaper, I don't know if anyone picks up the newspaper anymore, but if you look at the news and read it online, there's something about this in the news most days. And I'd say 99% of the time it's in a positive light. So I would recommend asking your mother's physician about it first. Just what do you think? Have you had experience? If that physician is completely against it, which I kind of doubt, but you could also come to Dr. Weinberg and have him, be your first line of using cannabis medicine with your mother. And, then there could be a back and forth between the primary and someone like us. I don't think people are so anti, occasionally, and it's usually they just haven't taken the time because they're too busy to be educated about it.
Yeah, I mean, I consult all the time with other doctors, and we're very open about trying to educate them and explain what all the things that we just talked about today. And hopefully these doctors are scientists and they're open-minded and they look at the data and are willing to try something.
And it really doesn't have to be an either or. So, that your mother would not have to stop the current medicine if she's on medicine. The cannabis would be added intelligently, and she would be followed and checked up on by someone like myself. And then, maybe there would be a time where, oh, wow, her symptoms are really improving. And then maybe some of that other medicine would be slowly taken away. But it's not a dramatic and it's not an either or. It can really be an and, at least for the beginning. And when the results come in, when the patient's happier, the family's happier, everyone around that patient will be happier, most importantly, that patient. So it's just such a no-brainer.
Yeah. No,
or higher. It's more of a brainer. It's not a no-brainer. I mean, speaking of dementia, it's a frontal lobe enhancement, I'd say.
well, so you have other questions, Matt?
So, yeah, sorry, I was muted. So I have one here is from a clinician, I guess. How can I obtain a medical cannabis certificate in New York?
Easy, through Dr. Weinberg. Just call and make an appointment.
Yep.
Is that what you mean? Or that's how you would get a certificate, and then physicians, there are courses they can take through the state to be able to certify it from themselves.
Right. If this person wants to be a registered cannabis clinician, they have to take a course. If they just want to get a certification to obtain it, yes, contact us and we're happy to help. It's very easy to get.
Okay, very good. I have another question. What's the difference between medical versus non-medical / street cannabis?
It's huge. And this is the time. Cannabis and hemp are super accumulators, which means that they take in so many things from the air and from the soil. And I always say that when the Chernobyl accident occurred, they planted hemp to draw up radioactivity from the soil. So I always have that in mind, because you don't know what you're getting when you get street weed. It could have all kinds of crap in it, you know, toxins, heavy metals, pesticides, bacteria, etc. So when you get medical grade cannabis, you're getting something that every batch of which is tested either at the Wadsworth lab in Albany or at a private lab. So you know you're not getting any of that kind of crap in it, and you're getting precise amounts of, and you know exactly what you're getting. So I think it's a huge difference. So Sarah, you know, anything you wanted to add?
No, I mean, yes, all of that. So you just it's quality control. I mean, maybe if you know a farmer who's growing organically, and, you know, it's kind of like buying your tomatoes at the farmer's market versus in plastic, you know, there is some wiggle room to, and the way the laws are changing now, maybe there are some different ways that one could bring it in as therapy. But yeah, you just really want the utmost quality, and that's why you would go through a legitimate source medical standard.
Okay, we have a maybe related question. Someone asked, what about the feeling of paranoia?
Too much THC. It's too much THC taken too quickly. Inhaling it, taking too much. So you would do a different approach. The different routes of administration affect the body differently. And then because of the quality, like what Dr. Weinberg was saying, getting it from, you know, the medical dispensaries, you know how many milligrams of something you're getting. So it's a quality and it's a type, and that doesn't have to be a problem.
Okay, very good. Another question. What about over-the-counter CBD? Is it as effective as medical cannabis purchased in a dispensary?
No. There was a study done. In fact, there was something in the, was it in the Time? No, one of the TV stations did something a few years ago where they went to a variety of different places that were selling CBD, and many of them, what they touted as CBD didn't even have CBD in it. So that's one thing. Number two, you want something that's called full spectrum. You want as many of those terpenes and other cannabinoids in there, because they really help the effect. So, you know, the local bodega, I would not go to get CBD from. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Sarah.
I mean, especially because we're really talking about medical here, and we're trying to treat dementia, you know, and these really challenging conditions. So you want to really know what you're putting in your body. And yeah, you have no idea. So like, don't buy CBD oil on Amazon. Don't buy it from down the street at the grocer. I mean, maybe there's some decent quality, but you want someone who knows the marketplace, like, you know, one of us, to really help you navigate that.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I don't see any more questions in our queue. Did you want to say again if they would like to reach out to you, Dr. Weinberg, how they can do that?
Yes, they can go to our website, which I think we've had, but we'll put up again. The easiest way is www.cdony.com, which stands for Cannabis Doctors of New York. And then there's a lot of information there, and it's very easy to obtain a certificate there. And yes, please reach out to us. We're around, and we, as you can tell, are very happy to talk about it and give people information and get people on board.
Are people experienced in this group with cannabis as medicine? I mean, maybe it's too personal and you don't have to answer, but I'm always curious how many people are actually using this or know a loved one who's using it in a therapeutic way.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Would you say in the elderly population, people using it for recreational use, that maybe that sort of washes into therapeutic? People find it makes them at ease. At the same time, maybe it does help some of their chronic conditions.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying before when I was showed the picture of the plant and the spiritual or pleasurable aspects of it. I think that's certainly happens when people may be using it recreationally and then they feel better. Their joint pain is better, their back pain, their GI symptoms are better. So that definitely happens.
I actually was having dinner with a friend last night whose father is in an assisted living, and he's in his 80s and he has dementia. And he, smoked joints. I mean, he's a professional man, but he smoked, most of his adult life. And he was even smoking, into his 70s and 80s. And just in the last couple of years, he is in assisted living. And sometimes in assisted living, the challenge is getting it to the patient, depending on the rules of the facility. So he was out without it for several months, and he's had a lot of agitation. Everything has gone kind of downhill. And the only difference is, this new place, but also that he is not smoking at all. So actually we talked about starting to do some, like gummy type thing or tincture type thing to help those symptoms, because that was really the only change. And, so meanwhile, it was helping him therapeutically, and maybe he didn't articulate that or know that, as well as his family does now, since it was taken out of his just daily activities.
Good. Yeah, no, it sounds like he should get restarted on it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Weinberg, and thank you, Sarah. I
Sure.
appreciate your presentation today. I'm sure everyone did. And I would just a few comments before we leave. To check out our future events, you can go to our website at pssusa.org and see what we have upcoming for this month and into August. So again, thank you very much and take care, everyone.
All right, thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.